in this market, because you mentioned it, where whether it's gold or property or equities or pork bellies or collector watches, it doesn't matter what asset class you're looking at.
Perfect. Good segue, Scott. Thanks for saving me from myself.
No, it's fine. You used Rolexes all the way up to the stock market. Everything feels very frothy and expensive, and in some ways overvalued. So even in this market, what are the three strategies to get wealthy with Erin Freize?
So rule number one is a cliche that we've heard so many times that we're sick of hearing it. Learn to live on less than what you make, right? We also know that is pay yourself first, but if you are never in a position to live on less than what you make, you will never be financially independent, right? So, and that's where Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey, Finance 101, Personal Finance 101, learn to live on less than what you make, okay? So save until it hurts. The more you save, the earlier you save, and the more abundantly you save, the quicker you'll become financially independent, right? Think about the person who has, from the time they were flipping burgers to the time they started making real money in the mortgage markets. Imagine that person has always saved half of their income. Well, if you right now could half of what you can afford a place in, right? Afford a place in Murray in South Carolina, your permanent resident, and maybe you afford a getaway chateau. It's where it's fun to go, right? Learn to live on less than what you make. That's rule number one. You've heard that one before, obviously.
Absolutely, and I've got a funny story about that. I remember when very early on when I first started doing loans, I took a loan for a guy who is I don't know, shift manager, maybe a store manager at Jack in a Box. And I've got to tell you, in my 20s, working at a bank and wearing a suit to work every day is maybe somebody I would have looked down on. And when I looked at his 401k and he had $1 million in his Jack in a Box 401k because he started there 20 years ago flipping burgers, maxing out his 401k, and 22, 23 years later, this was probably in the mid 2000s. So he had survived the bubbles and he had ran it up. When I saw that guy and I was like, oh, this guy's buying a house. He's changing the financial direction of his family and he's got $1 million in retirement. And he's probably got another 10, 15 years to work, and it's not glamorous, and it's working at fucking Jack in a Box, but he's crushing it just from compound interest. So that really changed my opinion on how much wealth you can accumulate if you save from an early age. So, sorry, that's my little anecdotal story, and I'll probably tell that story 100 more times on this podcast because it really stuck with me in my 20s. And then I didn't learn from it, and I didn't do anything until my 30s. So, whoops. But anyway, okay. So live below your means, pay yourself first, save till it hurts. What's number two?
Okay. So again, that guy who's got $1 million in his 401k and he's not done working is probably in a better position that owns $1 million of personally owned real estate, right, where they live. He's in a better position. So if you learn to live on less than what you make, rule number two, do something smart with the difference. So what does that mean? It means early on, get to be that guy who has $1,000 in their savings account, which you and I both know most Americans can't do. We are bred to be famous consumers, right? We can buy things with the best of them because that's what we're trained. We're inundated every day. Buy this, buy that. It's on our phones. It's on our TVs. Every screen is helping you become a better and better consumer. But no, you have to be a better and better saver and then do something smart with the difference. So eventually, after you've developed the discipline to have $1,000 in your account, next step is, again, I don't know if this is rule number 3 or 4 or what is, but Dave tells us have enough for an adequate emergency and opportunity fund, right? So too many people see that as the rainy day fund, but it is also your opportunity capital. Have a fund that regardless of the next paycheck, you can dip into it. For some people, depending on their business, is only a month or two. For some people, they may want 12 months of liquidity that they can tap like that, right? And so after that, make sure you are putting at least as much into your retirement plan as your employer is matching. That's probably rule 14, but it's Dave Ramsey tells us to do the same thing. If you are eligible, which is most most people who are starting out, not somebody who's at your level now, but if you're eligible, max out, get to the point where you're putting $50 and then $100 and then $500 a month into a Roth IRA, right? That's a very smart place to put capital because they will change the rules. Roth 401ks are newer and they're not as juicy because one, it has to be a distribution from an employer plan. Not every employer plan is going to allow in-service distributions. Two, if you can get a distribution from a Roth 401k, the distribution is not all a return of your basis or your contributions cumulatively. What you get out of a Roth 401k is part interest and part principal, right? So there's going to be a gain component that's going to be taxable. Roth IRA isn't the same way. If you've been putting, and I'm going to use a round number, $5,000 a year into your Roth IRA, and if it's worth $120,000 10 years out, well, you've got 50 grand you can tap into without any penalties, right? Without any taxes. So that's a double-edged sword. It is more available and more liquid than other types of retirement plans, but that's one of the reasons we want to put money into a Roth IRA. When they changed the rules, the service, the IRS, often grandfathers existing plans. So if you haven't opened one yet and you're eligible, and off the top of my head, I think you have to be married filing jointly under $196,000 of adjusted gross income, right? If you fall below that threshold, whether it's just for 1 year because of COVID, or you haven't filed your return, and we're sitting in 2021 and we have until May 17th to make a contribution, we'll go ahead and try to source enough as much as possible, ideally from your opportunity fund. And maybe in previous years, you made too much, you weren't eligible. If you're eligible for 2020 and you haven't filed yet, go ahead and make a contribution as big as you can. Get your Roth IRA grandfathered before they change the rules on us. Because again, the Roth 401k is newer than the Roth IRA, which came out in the late 90s. The Pension Protection Act of 2006 gave us the Roth 401k. And again, they're not as juicy as the Roth IRA. You better believe that just like a Roth 401k, they will mandate distributions from a Roth IRA. Well, what do I care if I'm paying taxes? Well, if they can mandate distributions, they will probably institute rules that will mandate how much you can take per year that's still going to be tax-free.
Got it.
Right? Right now, it's unlimited. You can put your $50,000 away over 10 years, be ineligible for the rest of your life. Let that pocket of $120,000 grow to be $1 million, right? And every dime you take out of it, as long as it's after age 59 and a half, is going to be a qualified distribution and completely tax-free. I could see them changing that down the road to make them less juicy. All right. So what else can you do? Again, contribute to your employer's retirement plan, at least up into the match, then go back and maximize your Roth IRA. But set up what I call a fund. Now, this is beyond your rainy day and opportunity fund. You can set up a pool of money called a non-qualified account. You ever heard that term before?
Yes.
So all that means is the nature of the investment is going to dictate the taxes that you pay. So when I talk about non-qualified, I'm taking out of the realm of IRA and qualified employer-sponsored retirement plan like a 401k, 403b, 457. So if we have a non-qualified plan, now there are no rules around how much I can stick in it every year. I'm not limited to $6,000 like the Roth. I'm not limited to whatever it is, 19 or 26,000 into a 401k. I also don't have income limits. Like I said before, the AGI limit for a Roth IRA contribution. Well, now you don't have to worry about that. You can make $1.2 million and put money in this account as much as you want, as little as you want. You also don't have age restrictions like 59 and a half before the money I take out is deemed qualified. You don't have age 72, used to be 70 and a half before the Secure Act, which was passed before the CARES Act last year. The Secure Act meant that now if I have qualified retirement dollars that I've never paid tax on, like most people deferring salary into a 401k, eventually you got to pay the piper. Do you think that tax bill is going to be greater today under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, aka those evil Trump tax cuts? Or do you think taxes are going to be higher when we got to pay off this now $30 trillion worth of debt?
Yeah,
I think tax rates are going to have to go up.
This is one of the great scams, right? Because, well, I feel like it's a scam. Maybe it was an accident. When I got my Series 7, when I was at Washington Mutual for 8 years, where they wanted you to be able to do loans and investments and annuities and open new accounts. So I got my Series 7. I started the CFP series that you completed to get your certified financial planner. And all of the marketing was about have your 401k, have your IRA now, where you put money away when your taxes are higher because you're working and presumably earning more money, and then take it out in
Right.
20 or 30 years when taxes are lower. But what's starting to develop is there's never going to be a time period 20 or 30 years from now where taxes are lower. So great, you're deferring, money now at a 20, 25, 30% tax rate, only to have it grow and then take it out in the future at a, 25, 30, 35, 40, for some people 50% tax rate.
33, 40 cents. Right.
Yeah, so the
Especially in California.
yeah, in California, we're up to the point where, if you, unless you're on a, LLC or you're self-employed where you can write everything off, if you're just a W-2 employee making over 200, 250 grand, they're going to get 35% of your income. And goodness forbid you go over 500 grand in income on a W-2, they're going to find a way between the federal and the state and all the fees and all the other overhead. They're going to find a way to get 50 cents on the dollar, which is pretty crazy to me. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation. So
Yeah.
rule number one was, spend less than you make. Rule number two is do something smart with the
Yeah.
difference. Our IRA plans, and then your non-qualified plans, which is just investing, stock market, mutual fund, whatever. And then what's rule number three?
Correct. So, and there's a lot more smart things to do. That's where you get into real estate. Whether you're starting out, maybe it's in your Roth IRA, you do a real estate investment trust because they're doing all the diversification, all the heavy lifting. Eventually, you own your own properties, whether it's the home you live in, a vacation home, or ideally some rental properties. Maybe you're savvy enough to do things on spec and you can buy a property and flip it for 2x. I don't know. Maybe it's having permanent cash value life insurance where it's not just a death benefit for the people you care about, but also an asset that grows regardless of what the markets are doing. Or you use that because you can no longer do a Roth IRA. You're maxed out at what you can put in your 401k. And by the way, you are accepting all the risk to grow that pile of money. And then the IRS, after you've taken all that risk, after you've grown the capital, says, okay, Scott, I'm ready for my share. Right. So diversify your tax buckets, non-qualified Roth, life insurance cash values would still get FIFO treatment. The money I put in, I can get out first without having to pay tax. Thereafter, maybe policy loans. And we can talk about that broad. Again, as a CLU, I can work magic with permanent life insurance. We can talk about that. But that's 1 and 2. Learn to live on less than what you make. Do something smart with the difference. And again, I'm putting this out there because it's my business. You need to have somebody, an accountability partner that you trust to help you do 1 and 2 better and better all the time. That's rule number 3. Hire someone you trust who is not going to tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to hear to make sure you're saving the right way, that you're saving yourself from maybe some of the pitfalls in capital markets or getting over your skis, who is going to look you in the eye when times are really cantankerous and say, Scott, it's okay, right? We planned for this. Everything is all right. Yes, this asset class is down 38% this year, but it's okay. In fact, you have some money in your opportunity fund. Let's deploy it, right? Let's get a discount on that asset class while it's still cheap, right? Stocks are the one thing that people wait until the sale is over before they start buying again, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's rules number 1, 2, and 3. Sounds pretty simple, but without number 3, it's hard to have somebody to help you do those things.
Yeah.